Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the Parrot Club's September 2023 meeting. We're very happy to have Jennifer Cunha back with us. She's the creator of the Parrot Kindergarten Program, designed to mentally enrich and challenge companion birds, and My Reading Pets, a program to develop easy communication techniques with your birds. She's been working with fellow researcher Rébecca Kleinberger on groundbreaking scientific study that made national news recently regarding how companion pets respond to video calling other parrots. Seeking to increase parrot happiness, they monitored 18 parrots as they chatted with their parrot friends over the screens. The parrots even got the opportunity to ring a bell to request a video call and to choose whom they talk to. Jen is an attorney, an animal cognition trainer, writer, and international speaker focusing on animal literacy and communication. A parrot mama for over 16 years, Jen has been developing cognition training techniques for almost a decade. Her training manuals have been translated and distributed throughout Europe, and she's been featured in Bird Talk magazine. She's written articles for the International Association of Applied Behavior Consultants Journal as a frequent lecturer at science conventions and companion bird gatherings around the world. She collaborates on animal literacy and communication projects with university researchers, and her research has been published in peer-reviewed scientific proceedings. Her birds, Ellie and Isabelle, have passed university-designed blind tests on phonics and reading comprehension skills, and are considered the very first animals who have learned how to read. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Jen.
Thank you so much. Oh, Amy, that was very kind. Thank you so much. So my plan today, I know that we're going to chat a lot about the video call study, and oh, Bonnie, thank you. I think you're amazing too. About the video call study and what it looked like, what the stuff was. But I thought I'd start a little bit before that and kind of how we got to the place of making a video call study. So is anybody here really new to like the idea of the research that we do? Is anybody unfamiliar with the animal?
There are two special throwaways, so I'm just going to take
Okay.
them home.
So basically, a long time ago, my bird Ellie was really hard, and she would bite and scream and do all this hard stuff. So I started like doing training with her, like we often do, and then I started doing like cognition training with her to try to get her to be happier. And then, of course, it was weird, but it kept working, that she seemed to be learning letters. And this evolved over time into exploring what does it mean to give animals like a lot of choice and agency in the way that they communicate with us. Communicate is a bit of a big word. It's loaded. And what does communication even mean? What does it mean for animals to be able to tell us things? They tell us things when they bite us. They tell us things when they point, like when they're staring intently at the steeple. They tell us things when they fly away, right? All of this is communication. So when we think of communication, we think of language. These are two very different things. Communication, trees communicate, right? They send information to each other. Babies communicate. They don't mean to, but they're crying. So there's voluntary, there's involuntary communication. And I wondered, what does it look like to explore what that looks like with parrots? And how can we make it easier for humans to understand what that looks like? And I remember I was like getting gas one day, and I was just thinking, and Ellie was a baby, and I was just like, I can't imagine being as smart as she seems to be in a body for 65 years maybe, and not even able to tell me yes or no. Like I pick all her toys. Maybe she doesn't like those toys. I try to figure out what she likes, but I'm a bit of a dictator. Like I'm a benevolent dictator. I am in charge of every part of her life. She has no voice. And for like, I think a year and a half, I kept trying to teach her to nod and shake her head. And I was like Helen Keller. So it was like every time she didn't want something, I was like, no, you didn't say no. Like, this is what we do. No. And she had this moment one time when she really didn't want something. And she looked at me and she was like, and I was like, yay, that's it. So that was like this big breakthrough. But then I also saw that she didn't use that a lot. It was really only for really big things. But you could be like, do you want spaghetti? She'd be like, you know, or whatever. Do you want broccoli? She didn't use it a lot reliably. So how like could I reliably know what she wants? I felt huge guilt and I didn't sleep at night sometimes. I felt so crappy that she maybe had like a bad life. And I would just think maybe she would have been happier in the wild. And I read a lot of articles, like, what does it look like for animals to be, can animals be happy in our houses? Like, what does that look like? Would they be happier in the wild? I'm not gonna let her go, but I had like 4 years of a lot of bird mom guilt, because I didn't know what to do with her, and she was really miserable. So of course, as you guys know, this opened us up to like trying to use symbols to like bridge this gap we had where she was really smart, but she couldn't shake her head and nod her head and all that stuff, except very rarely. And then me knowing that she seemed to have a lot of opinions, and I was getting bit quite a lot. So I grabbed the phonics letters and I started teaching her phonics. And the really exciting thing is that in 2017, we started working with Dr. Lynn Perry from University of Miami. And I was like, okay, I think my birds are doing something weird in the kitchen. And she was like, okay, let's give them the hardest words you can possibly think of. And I was like, are you sure? Are we sure we want to give them really hard words? And she was like, yeah. What do you think they can do? And I was like, they've learned suffixes. Why don't we try big words? And so we ended up doing like 3-syllable words with same starting letters to see like, and Ellie was like, this is stupid. I could do so much more. And she just hops off. But Isabelle did all these words. And essentially, it was our first project, but it's an exciting project because it just got published 3 weeks ago in a really good journal. And it basically is the very first time, to my knowledge, and I've been looking at this a long time, that any animals have done phonics. And when you read the literature on like, could animals learn, you know, patterns of letters or this or that, everyone always writes, well, we know reading is uniquely human. Only humans could ever learn to read. Like, reading is uniquely human, but this passion that our animals can have around learning pushes the bounds of what science believes about them. When we open up their world and we say, what do you want to learn? And we follow that, they actually give us some really interesting insights, which is also what's coming up in the video study. So this is the first time that animals have done phonics. They did really big words, like 3-syllable words. They did a really good job. And that one just got published in Interactions Journal. And that kind of kicked off this, I'm a lawyer too, not a lot anymore, don't tell. But I also am like, what are the proofs? Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Like, what is the evidence? What's the evidence? Because I also think that if we assume our animals are communicating something that maybe they're not, we could hurt them. And this looks like, I knew somebody who felt like her bird like hated her and maybe was saying this, like, I hate you. And I don't think this bird has ever heard these words. Certainly when I look at this bird and this mom, I think she has mom guilt, right? She just has a lot of mom guilt. But when we think our animals are saying something that they're not truly saying, it can hurt our relationship. It can hurt what we think that the truth is around these things. One time I knew somebody who left a really hot pot on the stove or somewhere, and she was like, this is very hot, don't go near it. And then the bird landed and like got burned, and she was like, no, I told it and it said yes, it understood, right? So we have also this dangerous place that can happen when we think that we're communicating or our animals are communicating and there's a miscommunication. So to me, when we think of science, we think of exploring what communication looks like in animals, when we think about exploring even what video calls look like in animals, there's a huge part of this that's ethics. What is the safe thing for the animal? And to me, one of the safest things is to look at their bodies. Their bodies aren't going to lie. If I say, do you want a shower? And then I bring out the squirt bottle and I'm like, Isabel's like, yes, I'm in a shower. And under some research, they're about 75% accurate. And yes, no, 70 to 80% is what our data says. Humans do not think that we are that much better. We are 30 to 90% accurate in self-reporting. So human accuracy, when we say yes and no, you can suspect a little bit when you talk to people now, because it's 30 to 90%, and birds are about 70 to 80%. So when I say to Isabelle, do you want a shower? And maybe she was thinking about the pine nut she would rather have, and she wasn't paying any attention, and she says, yes, I would like a shower. Like, a lot of times mom brings things I like, I'm not paying attention. Yes. I bring the squirt bottle over, and she's like, freaking out. That tells me she meant no, right? So when we think about research and video calls and communication with our animals, we also think, what are the ethics? And to me, the ethics are their bodies. The ethics are the evidence corroborations that come with what we do. So when we think about communication and other things, we always think also like, how are their bodies proving things? So that's a lot of what we do. We now, I have a lot of, I have 3 papers due on, what's today? Thursday? No, today's Tuesday, Thursday. So I'm basically working from 10 a.m. until 4 a.m. every single day. It's been this way for a week. And they're really exciting. It's very, 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 very exciting stuff. I am part of an international lab now that we just co-founded, and it's the group that created the video calling study. So let me tell you about that, and then I have some slides I'm going to share. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so once upon a time ago, started research, super loved it. And then pandemic hit. That was stressful. And then my research like died down a little bit because pandemic was a bit stressful, but I got invited to speak at a symposium, a scientific symposium on some different subjects. And they wanted me to talk about feeling expressive communication, and then also a panel of animal design. Okay, so sorry, boring part. But the interesting part is that the person who put it on is Dr. Ellie and Isabelle Douglas, who is one of the co-sponsors of this symposium, and this whole video calling device was her dream. So Dr. Eliana Herskes Douglas, if you went to Netflix last year and you opened netflix.com, she was the picture for a little while because of her work in animal technology. She created a dog phone. She just, where we're stuck with what exists on a tablet or what exists already for humans, and we're always trying to adapt it for animals, she makes for animals. She said, I think one summer, she was like, I think my dog might like a TV that's 180-degree angle. So she just designed a TV that he can sit 180 degrees, look at his TV. She designs things for animal bodies. And she had hosted the symposium. And then afterwards, it was such a cool place because it's a place of technology dreaming. They were like, what would it look like to have a tablet that's made for birds? What would it look like that they didn't have to boop their faces on the screen? Maybe they could pull, or they could touch something, or they could do something their bodies already do. If you imagine right now, what would it look like for your birds to be able to do stuff that their bodies already do? What is that? It's a whole new world. So this meeting I went to is this whole new world of what does technology look like that's centered and around animal movements, their bodies. And at the end of it, I wrote her a thank you note. I was like, dear Ileana, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. This was really great. My mind is blown. It's a whole new world out there. And she wrote back and she said, well, I had this idea about an animal internet. What if we had birds calling each other? So she said, there's somebody else, Dr. Rébecca Kleinberger from MIT, and maybe we can explore this idea together. And that is the start of a really cool friendship and collaboration. Dr. Corey Ranguet from Indiana University at Purdue has also joined us. And now we have all kinds of projects going around, especially bird bodies. What does it look like to create for birds? What do they need? What do they like? Okay, so Amy, are there any questions? And if not, I'm going to share my screen and dive into the study.
I don't see any yet, so feel free to start screen sharing.
Okie dokie, let me just grab it. Where did it go? Oh, it's here a second ago. There it is. Okay, slideshow. So this is This is the presentation that we gave, that Eliana presented at Chi, and that Rébecca did for YouTube. And then this is also, this was just the keynote speech for the for AAV Exotics Con, one of the keynotes. So so I think this was presented to like 1,200 veterinarians 3 weeks ago. And so it's really amazing. What would animals, what would birds do if they could call each other? Would they want to call each other? What would happen? What does that look like? So I'm going to tell you how the study unfolded and what the results were, what we looked at, and then I'll tell you some also pretty amazing things. Amy, I'm going to change it so that I can't actually see the chat too much. So if there are any questions that come up, feel free to ping me. And then the other thing is that I am not allowed to use, because of like ethics and anonymity, I'm not allowed to speak specifically about anybody who is in the study. I think that some have said that there are some who are here, wink, wink, but I'm not allowed to talk about anything specific about anybody in particular, just because that's part of the ethics from the university. But also, if anyone happened to be here, thank you so much for joining us. It was amazing, amazing, amazing.
Are people who are in the study who are here themselves allowed to talk about themselves?
I think so. I think that we would be able to do that. So yes.
We know who you are, so.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so this is Birds of a Feather, video flock together. And one of the reasons that birds were picked, there's this whole movement and idea around what would it look like to create an internet for animals. And of course, when you think of internet, maybe you think of browsing. So maybe they'd be like going on Amazon and ordering their favorite treats or or whatever they're doing. But actually a lot of this is oriented around what would they want to do if they were connected by internet? What would that playful space look like? What would that space just generally look like? So one of those things that's explored quite a lot or thought about too is like calling each other across space. So oops. The very first thing that happened, let me just make sure I have, okay, so the method was, this is a little bit sciencey, but I'll tell you all the fun things that are cute anecdotes so that it's a little less sciencey. Okay, so basically in science, a lot of times you start with a pilot study. And the pilot study gives you information so that you can create a really good regular study that you put into the public while having insights and feedback from the original pilot study. So in our pilot study, there are 4 birds, and we were like, okay, so caregivers don't say anything. We're just gonna like train them to call a friend and then see if they call, and caregivers like, you should maybe like hide a little bit or not be near, not say anything, don't respond. Like, we don't want praise or reinforcement from the caregiver to be the reason the birds are calling each other. We want to see, do they want to call each other? And then it turned out that the birds really didn't like it when their caregiver walked away. And they'd be like anxious, they'd be looking, and they're like, where'd you go? Why aren't you here? There's a weird thing on the screen. Like, where have you gone? I have anxiety. And no, just kidding. So we just saw that initially and we're like, oh, okay, no. Caregivers should be in the loop. Let's keep the caregivers in the loop. So we got some really good information from a pilot study that told us, you know, essentially that caregivers are a huge part. Your bond with your bird, what we've seen, and this is not science necessarily, but what we've seen is that your support, your nurturing, your interaction is also part of this process. And maybe speculatively, it could be that you help them feel safe when there's something new going on. And so they'll look at you and they'll be like, am I okay? Is this safe? Is this safe? So so caregivers from our pilot study, we realized a really important part of birds calling each other. So and then from the pilot study, we developed the project, and the project had part 1 was teaching all the birds to call, to who their friends were and that they could call. And part 2, this like dramatic moment of, we've just spent almost a month, I guess it was 2 weeks at the time, 2 weeks teaching the birds the system of ring a bell and touch the picture of your friend. And if you ring a bell and touch the picture, then the friend appears on the screen. So we set 2 weeks, and each bird had 1 or 2 friends, and they learned that they ring a bell, and then they get to choose a second way, like a second corroboration. They choose their friend, and then the friend they call. So, and then all the calls are limited to 5 minutes to make sure nobody got stressed out or things like that. So that was the training, and then I think we started with 18 birds. And that was the training. It lasted a couple of weeks, and then you have this moment where we set the bells out, or the caregivers set the bells out in their play areas. And the question was like, will they go to their bell and ring the bell and actually make a call, right? Like now they know, because we've been training them, like ring a bell, touch your friend, you call a friend, ring the bell, touch your friend, you call a friend. Now we're going to put the bell in their play area. Do they do it by themselves? What happens? So it was this like moment where we were like, does it work? Does it work? And then all the birds started calling each other. It was so sweet. We were like, ring, 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 ring. They were all calling each other. It was so cool. So all of the birds in the study did end up making calls. But I will also say that we started with 18 birds. And for the full study, when we went to, or the second part of the study, we actually did have 3 birds that dropped out before going into the full study, the second phase of the study, because of stress. So they just didn't love calling. They seemed to have some stress behaviors around it. So one really interesting thing to note is when we think about our birds calling each other, and I was like, oh yeah, I love my birds. I want my birds to call everything. Can my birds call my fish, right? Like how fun would it be for animals to connect? One of the biggest takeaways we have from the study is actually that some of them didn't like it, and a lot of them needed support, a lot of support. And even though they ended up ultimately like seeming to really enjoy this experience, they also were scaffolded with a lot of training and support and review and remediating, like training. So it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to turn on a video call and my bird's going to love it. Off the top, 3 out of 18 were out. And then out of the remaining 15, 5, a third, ended up needing support at some point. Something scared them on the screen, and then they were afraid of the screen. A bird screamed too loud and it scared them, and now they needed more support. So 8 out of 18 ended up actually needing like professional behaviorist intervention. So yeah, and so when we think about birds calling birds, it seems almost intuitive, like, oh my God, they would love it. But it's actually not. It's actually that you never know if another bird in the room is going to scream really loudly and scare the bird on the other side. Or maybe a bird is going to lunge and scare the other bird. Or maybe the bird comes too close and now they're like a monster size on the screen and your little tiny bird is like, whoa, what's going on here? There's a lot of stuff that can go on in a dynamic of birds calling birds. So this is our method. We had part 1, part 2. Amy?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. A couple questions. Did any of the birds know any of the other birds in real life or by video prior to the study?
No.
No. And they didn't know the people at the other end either. So these were total strangers.
I'm not sure if they'd heard the voices potentially of some of the people on the other side. I can't remember whether some may have been friends with the caregivers of others. Like it, like the group was drawn from, people who may have known each other. And then the birds maybe had heard the voices, but not all of them. It might have just been a couple. But that didn't seem to like influence too much or anything that we saw. We didn't really look too much at that, but it was more, none of the birds had met before. Yeah.
And were any of the were the birds more, less, or equally likely to be comfortable with birds of the same species or from the same region, like Australian birds, South American birds? Because of course they're all speaking different languages.
Yes.
So, or was there no preference across parrot species?
The size was too small to be able to see. So one of the things that we found from the pilot study is that time zone is a big deal, because in the pilot study, some of the birds were in like California, and then one of the birds is my bird. She's in Florida, and they still call each other. They're still friends, but they the time zone issue is a big one. Like it's 10 in the morning, and Ellie wants to call her friend, and her friend is 7 in the morning. Like we're not calling them, or they want to call. It's like 8 o'clock their time. That's 11 o'clock our time. So we did end up grouping as much as possible in the same time zones, and with people who had the same kind of schedule. So if the birds, could call, it would be about the same availability of the caregivers.
Was it arranged ahead of time that the people, the birds at the other end would be available, say 4 to 5 p.m. or something, or was it just random? Let me call and see if my friend's available.
Yeah, for the study, everybody had to coordinate their times. So that did make it harder for caregivers, and that was one of the findings, or one of the things in the paper, was that like coordinating schedules was one of the challenges, for sure. Yeah, and ongoing. Yeah.
We have a question in chat. What type of bird species were in the study?
So many, big and little. We had from giant macaws to cockatiel, parrot, sun conure, and everything in between.
Okay. Were there any 2 birds of the same species that got to interact with each other?
Yes. So let's talk about that. There were these 2 male macaws who had not seen another macaw in decades. They were both, I think, in their 30s. One or both of them were sick, so they weren't really able to go into kind of like public spaces and meet other birds or anything like that. And it was really interesting because, especially like one of them in particular, he had a good life and an awesome family and all of that, but a lot of times he just kind of like hang out in his house doing 30-something-year-old male macaw things, which is mostly like staring at stuff. And then they introduced him to his friend, and these 2 macaws became like the best of friends in the entire world. You would put out the bell, and it was a race to see who called first. And then as soon as the tablet was getting done, they'd start ringing their bells again because they didn't want the calls to end. So they would sing, they would dance, they would talk and talk and talk and talk. They became really, really, really good friends, friends. So that was absolutely heartwarming, and I think the caregivers, just said like it brought them to life, both of them. So that was, one of the really precious kind of situations that came out, were these 2 male macaws that couldn't have any other species friends, or hadn't seen them in a couple of decades, and then this kind of relationship that seemed to develop. Okay, so these are different phases, and then the study set up, these were all of our little birds and big birds. They're so sweet and so cute. And phase 1 was the training. We talked about that before. So basically we had the device here, and the bell was associated with the call. So they learned to touch the bell, then they got to touch a friend, picture, and then they got to call the friend. Then stage 2, or phase 2, is open calling, max 5 minute calls. Each bird could make up to 2 calls in a session, and they had 3-hour windows. So the bell would go out, and the caregivers would be available for 3 hours. So if they wanted to make calls in a 3-hour window. The results were, oops, did I grab them up? Okay, the results were sense making. Okay, so most parrots made sense. So the first thing we looked at in science was can birds see anything on a screen? Like for us who have birds, we're like, of course they see things on screen. Have you seen like the YouTube videos? And also my bird, like all the birds are like playing on the screen. Okay, so, but in science, we have to say, oh, like we know that birds can see things on screen. So the first thing we looked at was sense making, and sense making was like do they react to things on the screen? Like, what physical proof do we have that the birds can react to the things that are on the screen? And most parents made sense of another bird on the screen. So another bird would come on, and then they would like react to it. They would vocalize at it. One of the birds might go off screen, and they would like follow it off screen with their beak, like, "Hey, where'd you go? Come back." So there was a lot of sense-making behavior that we saw, different reactions. Parrots reacted differently depending on who was in the screen. Okay, guys, there is this one bird that was a Quaker. And this bird just liked to call friends to yell at them. Like, that's all this bird wanted to do, is like, as soon as the bell would come out, they'd be like, ring, 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 and then they call a friend and be like, ba, 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 right? Just like yelling. Guys, this bird was like everybody's least favorite bird. Not mine, but like the two birds that it was a friend, the other birds would like call each other more. They're like, that one just yells at everybody. But he really liked yelling at other people, and he would call everybody. So he was making lots of calls. He was getting a little bit fewer calls in. And so they had different reactions to who was on the call. And also, I think some of his friends needed some support at some point, possibly, to like not be afraid of the screen. So more calls made. The birds that were most social got the most return calls. So what we saw were these interesting dynamics where, okay, I'm just gonna ask, I'm gonna stop my share. Who here, oh, we have a lot of screens off. Who here is an introvert? Any introverts? Okay, who's an extrovert? Okay, so this is a little bit of what we were seeing as far as not introvert, extrovert, but it turned out that the more, and I'll use the word extroverted just because it's easy to say here, the more extroverted the birds were, the more birds called them back. And then we had a couple of groups that seemed to have like a lot of introverts. And then those birds actually, like, the number of calls made in that group over time just went down. And then the birds that had like at least one really extroverted one were like call, and they did a lot of calling. So more calls made equals more calls received. This is as I recall it. It's been a little bit since I saw that part, but that's the way I remember it.
We have a question in chat. Did any of the birds eventually meet in person? And if so, did they appear to recognize one another from the calls?
Not that I know of. I don't know if any of them have met in person yet, but that's a really good question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then we also found that the human role is really important, that, you know, our birds tend to like look at us, is this safe? Are we okay? Am I okay? Don't leave me here alone. And then with this is anecdotal stuff, but with my bird over time, now she'll call, and she'll make a video call herself, so she'll like call, but then she actually gives herself a lot of space. So the setup design of the study also allowed for a lot of space. The birds could come, it was about 3 feet, they could go hide, they could leave, they could come back. There was just a lot of space for the birds to move towards or move away from or hide or do whatever their bodies, you know, seemed to want to do. And this way they weren't like stuck on a perch and they were like, oh, I'm scared, but I can't move. I don't know, like, this is really scary and I can't move. So we just had a lot of space. What I see with my bird is that she's pretty fine now if she calls her friend and the screen is up and they'll just like hang out or take naps or whatever. And I can be wherever, but also she'll call while I'm gone, and then whoever she's calling, she usually gives herself a little bit of space so that if there's anything on the screen that scares her, she's like a little bit of like, she gives herself maybe 2 feet. It's a bit of space. She'll like she'll press call and then she runs and like comes like pretty far back. Okay, so those are some of the findings. Design implications. Oops, hold on, I'm gonna just stop my share here. I think I grabbed the wrong slides. So basically for CHI, computer-human interaction was the conference that we presented at, and it's very technology oriented, right? So this is computer stuff. So we were really looking at design implications for, yeah, Maureen, that's a good question. I'll answer in 1 second. very, very good question. So we were really looking at like design implications and technology for these video call things. And so we wrote this paper, and then we found out that it was accepted. And CHI is one of the most prestigious science conventions in the whole world, especially it is maybe the most prestigious computer science convention in the world. It's very, very highly esteemed. So this is a tall order, right? This is like a really amazing convention. And then we submitted it, and then we found out it got accepted, which was really, really, really exciting. And then we got an announcement that, or we got like a notification that our paper in this really prestigious science convention had won an award. It was an award-winning paper. And it made me really happy because I just feel like when people realize how smart birds are and that they have, we don't know what they think, we don't know what they know, we know what their bodies do. And when they were trained to do this, they call each other. We also know that some of them like needed a lot of emotional support later, but we know that even with that scaffolding of support and behavior intervention, like all of those things put together to help them, that they made these calls. And it also made me really happy because then, with that, people know that birds are more than basically like feathered rocks. I feel like this idea has been for centuries, maybe, bird brain, right? A bird brain is supposed to be something that's really stupid and nonsensical and has no intention and just instinct, or maybe even not even instinct, maybe just like a robot basically with feathers. That's what we've thought for decades, centuries, however long. And the truth is they appear to be very, very intelligent and complex. And so this study, kind of in a roundabout way, highlighted the fact that they can learn this, and then they want to call. They had favorite friends. They reacted differently to different birds. Introvert groups became more introverted. Extrovert groups kept staying extroverted. Like all these things that weren't out there before. And then we found out that the New York Times wanted to carry the paper, and it just kind of went all over the world. And it was very unexpected in so many ways, but also it was just kind of like, I felt so happy. The caregivers who were part of the study worked really, really, really hard. And these birds were super, super cute and just adorable to follow and to learn about and to get to know. The caregivers did a lot of work. It was 3-hour windows several times a week for up to 2 months, plus training, plus some intervention, plus a lot of behavior, plus. And all of the work of all these little birds and their caregivers and this knowledge base that we had that was new was almost like it was celebrated around the world, that birds are so much more than rocks, that they're so intelligent, seeming. There's so much to learn still, but it made me really, really excited to hear that. And then of course, kind of went everywhere. We weren't expecting it, but I'm so happy that it did. So that's a little bit about that study. Let me tell you a little bit more. And first, let me grab Maureen's questions, or any questions that are in here. Do the birds appear to teach one another anything, pick up habits, or different behaviors? Yes, we had one person who said, actually we had a couple of people who reported new behaviors, but one person in particular had a bird that had never flown before. She had wings. I think she was adopted. But when the time that this caregiver had her, she'd never flown. And she was paired with some birds that flew. And over the course of the study, she started flying. So that was pretty incredible. Yeah. And then, again, like such a huge debt of gratitude to the caregivers who did this. It was a lot of work. And the work of others, the work of the participants is, what made it possible for the world to know what happened here and what they like. Did any of the birds reject being a friend of a bird of the same species? I didn't see. I'm not sure. We may have had some groupings that had. We had some groupings that had same species. I don't think we had rejection that I saw. Oh yeah, Dee's partner learned to play with toys. That's right. That was one of the things that was reported. Okay, so let me tell you why I don't recommend bird calls. And what I do recommend instead. So publicity became really big, and then everyone's like, oh, we did not say birds are lonely. I wouldn't say birds are necessarily lonely, but birds might like to call and hang out with their friends. That being said, I think that there are a lot of risks for birds calling birds, because I know this because 8 out of the 18 birds needed some support of some sort, like days of fear desensitization training after a bird scared them on the other side of the screen. Birds were dropped from the study because they didn't like it. And these are okay things, but it also underscores the fact that like there was a lot of professional help for a lot of the birds in the study who got scared by a bird on the other side. And Ellie's friend, one time Ellie and her friend were hanging out, and my bird Isabelle started screaming in the background. And if you know, Isabelle is an umbrella cockatoo. They sing the song of their people at a very high decibel rate. And that started scaring the birds in the family of her friend. It wasn't even Ellie, right? It was just like noise in the room. And then they had to end the call really fast. So there are a lot of risks in birds calling birds, and what I recommend instead very heavily are birds calling people. Because my birds love calling Grandma and Corey and Sierra and Cassie and me, and they'll call me as I'm driving out the driveway. They're like, where are you going? I'm like, I'll be back later. Or I'm late, and they call me and they're like, where are you? I'm like, I know I'm late. I'm coming. It's later than usual. I'm sorry. I took my trash out the other day. I was like taking out the trash into the dark. And I was like, what are you doing? She calls me. So I think that there is at least as much enrichment, if not potentially more, in them calling people. Because calling people, if you want to do some messenger stuff, like people dance, people are very predictable. They're not usually going to be screaming. They're not going to lunge at the screen. There's not like a lot of things that could scare a bird when they call their friend. So to me, I would say that if you're interested in this kind of work for your bird, all day long, I think calling family and friends is invaluable. It has added so much to my birds' lives to be able to call humans. They call humans more than they call their bird friends. So if you were interested, that's a little bit more the direction I would take, is having a group of friends who would be okay if your bird wants to call. And my experience is that almost everybody on my bird's friend list are like so over the moon happy that they're calling. They're like, yes, like they'll drop everything and they just want to talk and say hello. And my bird, like you see like their eyeball, right? Like they don't know how to stand in front of a screen, or maybe you won't see them at all. Like they're off screen completely. So they called Corey, and like Corey sees the wall, she sees no bird, but that's because Ellie's kissing the screen and you can't see her at that point. So these are just some considerations I have. I really recommend calling humans. I do actually pretty solidly, fairly strongly recommend against calling other birds, because we had a lot of birds that got scared, and we needed to like support them and help them through it, and then help them to like a tablet again. It was kind of a lot. So those are the kinds of considerations we have for bird calling. What kind of questions do we have?
Yeah, so I wonder if they called either birds of the same species or birds that they knew, because I've had birds that my birds knew, birds that have stayed here and then they've moved. And when they talk to each other, they're very happy to talk to each other. So you know, maybe the difference is, rather than cold calling a bird you've never met or a bird of another species, if the study had been big enough to include groups of the same species, maybe the results would have been a little different.
So here's something interesting that I saw. I'm going through Ellie's data, and I had her do a video called Isabelle, who's literally her sister. And when I was reading through her like logs of words, after she called Isabelle, she'd always say no like. And it's her sister. It's in the same room, which is not to say that birds calling each other don't like each other or anything like that. Like, it's possible for birds to call each other and like each other. But I think it's, and I didn't even know it. Like, I did not know personally that Ellie didn't like calling Isabelle. Like, I had her call because I was like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if they hung out? But, and that's not to say that other birds, like, you know your bird, you know what your bird's your reactions are and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't even realize that she had this association, like, until I was kind of reading through the, I should have, right? And like, I'm sitting there with her, but it didn't like lodge in my brain very deeply that, like, oh, several times she said no like over the course of however many months. So that is to say that they may enjoy calling each other, and there's a chance that we just don't know what might happen on the other side. So that's just like that's my like caution. And also there's so much to explore. So maybe it's all, you know, and the other part of it is that what I would love is in the future a device that takes the burden off of the humans to try to figure out if the birds are enjoying it or not. Because that's really the hang up. The hang up is, are the birds okay? So if there were a device that as soon as there was like a loud decibel, it just turned off. Where a face comes too close to the screen, it just turns off, right? And the birds really could have a lot of agency and call each other. I feel like that would be the solution. Like, they can just call, and then if there's something there that might scare them, that it can just automatically deal with it, you know?
Yeah, that would be great. Because when other species, I mean, they're not going to be speaking the same language.
Mm-hmm.
So their interactions are going to be more like miming, I guess, or you know, maybe do some screeches and stuff. But if it's not the same species, it's like me calling somebody who speaks a language I don't speak.
Sort of. So we didn't see that. We didn't have enough to see a lot about that. But I will say anecdotally that some of our groupings were like an African gray and a macaw, and they had fine interaction rates. And then also an African gray and two, what were they? Quakers. And actually the African, I think the African gray and the Quaker called each other the most. But maybe so, but the other part of it is that these are small groups. And Amy, your point is absolutely true, that it might be that if they were given the choice and we had a bunch of them that we could like really take data from, and this is actually a really good point, I'll like kind of bring back to our group. If there were data around choice preference, because our groups weren't that big, right? We didn't have enough birds to say like, well, let's put all the macaws together, let's put all these together, and then let's have mixed groups and see what it is. But I feel like there might be something to that if Ellie could call Goffins versus, you know, something else, she would be like, oh, hi, yeah, we talk the same language, look at my feathers, I have all these things to say. That's so true, Amy. It's a really good point.
Yeah. Gayla has in the chat. My blue front loves to watch videos of other Amazons talking and singing. So I think she would love to call other Amazons.
That's really, really, really cool. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, this is just the first study of hopefully a whole new world of animal interaction and calls. And what would it look like to, you know, for our birds to have an animal internet and be able to, you know, while you're busy, just call a friend and hang out. And then you feel so comfortable that if anything happens on the screen, if it gets loud, if they get close, if there's like a jerky movement, you know, then it just goes off and then they can call each other again. But at least like protect the things that we saw that would be the things that give us pause around it would be exactly the things that the device could account for. And then you would feel so comfy being like, oh, like I'm going to work, I'll just yeah.
I know
she also really likes your voice, Jennifer.
Oh,
she was whistling and
she's so sweet.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned at the very beginning about, you know, can our birds actually see what's going on? A few years ago, we actually had Dr. Graham Martin give us a talk from England. He's sort of the expert on parrot senses, you know, speaking, hearing, all that stuff. And we discussed a concept called flicker fusion frequency. Yes. And there were a couple of papers done with budgies, because that was one of my questions to him. When our birds watch, for example, a YouTube video, are they actually seeing it, or are they listening to it? And what are they seeing? Because those of us who remember the days of the CRT monitors, probably most of the people on here, sometimes the flicker you'd have to adjust the flicker. And if you didn't, you'd get this rolling screen that was impossible to see. And we found out in those studies that budgies have a different flicker fusion frequency than we do. So what are they actually seeing? And we don't really know, but the problem is the data is up on the air. There haven't been enough studies in that, but we don't know for a fact when they see the screen that they see it the same way we do, that they're looking at the bird and it looks just like the bird or not. Maybe it looks like something different, but then to them, okay, this is what an Amazon parrot looks like. And it's this thing that to us, if we saw the exact same thing, wouldn't look like an Amazon parrot at all. But then they're incorporating these sound cues and then saying, okay, this is an Amazon parrot, or maybe they're just listening to it. We think they're looking at it, but maybe they're looking at it because they're listening.
It's so interesting. It is. That's a really good point. Like that sense making, what is sense making? What does sense making mean to a parrot? And what do the screens provide for that? And that flicker fusion rate is a big deal, because they see, I think it's like 180 or 240. Like,
it was a lot higher than.
Yeah, and ours is like 70 to 80. And so the fact that they can still sense make on a device that's not made for them, that has like a flicker, it's literally like a moving picture. Sorry, 1 second.
See, I would love to know. Yeah, if we did a study with a tablet and set it to different flickers and had a parrot that was trained to sit there and look at the screen, would we reach a number where suddenly they'd be like, oh, look what I'm looking at, and they would react differently, and maybe we could interpret it as saying, oh, now they're actually seeing it, and this is the flicker it needs to be set at. The reason I say that is, my cockatiels will watch videos, and I don't know, I don't get the sense when I have it, let's say on my laptop, that they're actually seeing that. I don't see them tracking, say, movement of a cockatiel on a screen. But like, my bird Tulip, I can wear a picture of a cockatiel and he will react to that. So if I'm wearing a shirt, I once had I held up a picture from Bird Talk, a centerfold of baby cockatiels. And he was very broody at the time. He had a mate at the time. And even though, the centerfold, the babies are like this big, he looked at them and he used his daddy call to them. He knew those were baby cockatiels. And this was a photo. And then I've had him actually talk to something like this, where there's a picture, a representation of a cockatiel. And he's smart enough to realize that that is a drawing of a cockatiel, which is phenomenal. But I don't get the sense when he watches birds on the screen, I know he's hearing them and he'll call to them, but I don't see him tracking them on the screen. So I'm not sure he's actually physically seeing them.
And it might be a difference of like replay versus live, right? So it might be that, if it's just being replay, maybe he on some level knows this isn't a live thing, versus if he were in a live call. We don't know, Yeah, it's very interesting. The whole sense making thing. And then the whole like technology around, animal senses, right? It's so respectful and ethical. I hope that there's more of it in the future.
I'm just so pleased though that your work's being taken so seriously, because we all know what Dr. Pepper had. It took years and years for her to be taken seriously. No matter how rigorous her scientific studies, people were trying to act like this was, the old thing with the horse, the horse counting out the numbers. Jam, it's like they constantly kept raising objections to everything because they just didn't want to accept the fact that parrots were intelligent. So
Dr. Pepperberg is incredible. And the more that, at this point, like, I consider her a friend. She's just like an amazing person. And when I was in Boston, we had dinner and talked through like so much of what's going on. But she is I think her work and sacrifice, I mean, it's a lot of sacrifice that she made for this work, is the reason that we can do any of this, because she spent the decades of time it took to say birds can learn shape, birds can learn material, birds can learn, you know, these little tiny minutia. And really, she got into the field at a time in the 1970s when animal language studies were like blossoming. We were studying chimpanzees and sign language and gorillas and sign language and token exchange and lexicograms and all this like amazing stuff. And she was immersed in this world of like animal language studies that was really vibrant at the time. And then in the and she got Alex then, but then there was a guy named Terrence who had a chimpanzee named Nim Chomsky, and he realized, and he was in the animal language studies, and he realized that his chimpanzee hadn't really learned what he thought he had. So he, you know, spent all this time teaching this chimpanzee sign language, and this was going to be like a chimpanzee who could communicate. And then he realized that it was mostly clever Hans. And then he went out and he just tried to take out all the other researchers. He was like, none of this is true. It should be illegal. He tried to like, he crippled the funding. He said, nobody's allowed to study animal language, basically. And he got a lot of behaviorists on his side. And then it was like a big slaughter. There's a good article about it. I could put it in the chat here. And Dr. Pepperberg survived that. And it shifted what she was allowed to do with Alex, which is initially like animal language studies. That's his name, animal language experiment, Alex.
Right.
I think that's what it is. It shifted it to, can you count 1 and 2? How many corners? And I just can only imagine how absolutely devastating that would be to like take this beautiful creature that you think is so full of curiosity and limit it to quantifiable little tiny fractions of what it really can do. And because she did that, she like fought so hard for birds and paved this way for us to be able to do what we do, because we can just point and say, look, she laid the framework for it and the foundation. But it's a lot of sacrifice. And yeah, she's amazing. I mean, we all know she's amazing, but God, she's amazing.
She has a lot of respect for your work as well.
Oh, thanks. I absolutely adore her.
Yeah. Someone paves the way, fortunately, but they suffer greatly to do it.
She suffered quite a lot. Yeah. And yeah, so to me, she's just like a hero, a legendary hero for birds.
Right.
But her work makes this possible.
Maureen has a comment. I watch parrot videos with my cocktails all the time. Sydney, the male, will get really close to the screen, sing and call. It's very sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool. And what you guys are telling me about, and Amy, what you were sharing with yours, it just makes me have even more questions about like same species. What would that look like for them to be able to call the same species? And would they call more? And what would they like? All kinds of stuff to explore. And then like these behaviors that you guys have of your birds being really calm and sitting by the screen for YouTube videos. This is neat. It's really cool.
You know, there's this thing with cockatiels and videos. It's almost like a cottage industry. Like one cockatiel will sing a song, and then everyone shows that video to their cocktails, and it ends up spreading. Like there's this cockatiel named Cookie. I don't even know where Cookie's from. I think somewhere in Asia. And Cookie goes, Cookie, Cookie, Cookie. There are probably at least like 20 cocktails I know of that they're all posting videos and they're all going, Cookie, Cookie.
Oh my God, it's so cute.
It's everywhere because, you know, cocktails love to repeat sounds, repeat words, repeat tunes. So they end up spreading, or Alex, the famous cocktail, Alex the Hunk, his honking, then suddenly all these other cocktails start making this god awful honking sound. It's just, you know, so they certainly are paying attention, and they are recognizing whether or not they can see it, you know, is an unresolved issue, but they're very much hearing the sound and going, oh, that's another cocktail. And since cocktails love to learn sounds from other cockatiels, they're just learning this, and, you know, it just ends up passed on and spreading like wildfire.
That is so cool. That's really, really, that's adorable. It's like it's like a culture through YouTube. YouTube creates a culture for bird spikes.
It really is. So let me see, Bonnie, you're still here, right? Bonnie, I don't know if, would you like to tell us anything about your participation in the study?
Give me 1 second to get into a room where there are not children.
Okay. And is there anybody else here today who is in the study who wants to identify themselves? There are a few names in here I don't recognize, so I didn't know if there are any people from the study here or not, besides Bonnie. In the meantime, would anybody like to ask some questions?
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was babysitting and the parents just got home, or I am babysitting. So I'm glad you asked. It was absolutely incredible to be part of it. We didn't know where it would go. I don't think any of the bird parents knew what it would amount to. And when it did start hitting the news, I was just like jumping up and down. I still have from the, I remember that morning, and the person who I babysit for, who allows me to do parrot kindergarten, sent me the link to the New York Times article. And I said, yeah, that's Gabriel. And she said, she was like, oh my gosh, like, it was just so exciting to be part of something that people start listening and believing and realizing. And I echo what Jen says about it was a lot. We had a video every segment, and we had to answer questions, and we had to really learn through the study to observe our bird's body language. That was a huge part of it. And there was a trust factor of the trust between the bird and the human. And then also the other trust factors. Gabriel loved making calls. He was, I guess he was doing the allopreening thing. And he would play with toys, and yeah, he really liked it. So thank you. And it was just incredible. And I can't also say enough about Parrot Kindergarten and the realization of learning what they are truly capable of.
Thank you.
Yeah, those of you who don't
you,
know about Parrot Kindergarten, in the program links I sent out, there are links to Parrot Kindergarten. Absolutely check it out. Jen has all these fabulous programs there, and you can learn how to really learn so much about your bird and give them the choices. When she spoke to us previously a couple of years ago, she talked about Parrot Kindergarten, and it's really about giving your birds choices in their lives, because as she said at the beginning of the program, we're benevolent dictators. We love our birds, we're kind to our birds, but the reality is we make all the choices for them, and I'm sure they want to make some of their own choices. And through Parrot Kindergarten, you can learn more about how to do that with your birds. So I couldn't more highly recommend it.
Thank you. I just put into the chat, if anybody's interested in getting started for free with like stuff with your bird. Oh, yay. Yes. Lauren.
We do have another person from the study here, Lauren, who's with Boston Parrot. So I'm wondering if I know you, Lauren. I was just up there again last week, but she doesn't have a mic on her computer, but she was in the study with Gabby. She writes, I can say I was unprepared for Gabby to be one of the faces of the study when it went big. I even saw us in a random YouTube video the other day, but she was relatively uninterested in the call, just wanted to play on the tablet and with me. I mean, every bird's an individual.
Every bird is different. Yeah. All the birds are really different. And Gabby's so cute.
I'm just curious, Bonnie, when the study was over, has Gabe wanted to keep making calls? Is he upset he's not making calls anymore? Or do you still make calls to other birds or to people? Oh, Bonnie's on mute again. I don't know if she heard me.
No worries. She might be with the family.
Gayla has comments in chat too there.
Yeah.
And
And
Jen,
then I put in here a link if anybody, okay, so we have a free getting started guide. So it has like all of our favorite apps, tablets to pick out, cases to pick out. It's an email, so you stick in your email and you should get an email with a link to it. And then we also have some follow-up emails about like how to start with your bird, what to do with fearful birds, you know, just kind of like how often to train, how long to train, just some feedback about how to get started with like tablets with your birds. And then in October, we're having a free 4-day workshop for tablet training and also books. In case your birds, there are birds that don't like tablets, so it's all good. Some of my birds don't like tablets as much, but it covers like book enrichment, some symbol learning, and then tablet fun. And we're doing that 4-day course for the free workshop in October. Yeah.
wonderful. All right, do we have any other questions? As a reminder, because I know people have been, there've been some people have been coming in and out, that again, this will get posted to YouTube so you can get to watch the whole video if you missed some or part of it.
Sounds good. I just want to give a big shout out to our participants in the study, and not just this one, any study. It is work, but we value you joining us and the information that we get from the work that you do with your bird collaboratively. Like I could not even describe. So thank you. And I also feel like we should just celebrate our participants here. Like thank you, thank you, thank you. Your hard work makes all of this possible. I think of it as unlabbing research. Like instead of having animals in labs and in cages and, you know, with numbers or whatever, like the work that our caregivers do, you know, in the more public setting means that our birds are in families and they're so loved. And yet research can continue because of your hard work. So just thank you, big thank you.
I guess I should ask, how is this all funded?
Well, I work for free. so there's that.
You still have a day job. And
Sort of, yeah. So Joe has mostly taken over the law firm work. We have a law firm together, but I used to have to do a lot more hours, but now it's a lot of research and PK. And then, so for me, in research, I work for free. And then we really, I guess Rébecca and Ileana, you know, work at universities. And so, so they have their university income. Yeah.
So are you going to get yourself an adjunct position or something like that? You need a university credential for your.
Well, I'm actually a researcher at Northeastern now. So Northeastern brought me in as a researcher affiliate through Rébecca. So this is very awesome because now I have like all kinds of university support for the research we do. So technically I'm a research affiliate at Northeastern. Is a little bit more my day job. And then I still do practice a little bit of law. And then I think, yeah, like I'm really lucky to have a super awesome, supportive partner. And then he's just amazing. And I think, you know, we've launched the Interact Animal Lab. So this is a very new lab that is going to be studying this kind of work with all kinds of animals. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned at the computer conference meeting that person who designs devices for animals. Is there any work on device? Anybody going?
Oh, she's part of it. Yeah. So Dr. Husky Douglas Ileana, she's one of our lab team members. Yeah, so she was on the study too. So it was Ileana's idea, and then Rébecca, and then I came on as well. And then yeah, so we'll see what technology for animals looks like in the future. I think that our Interact Lab is really focused on developing animal-centered technology and ergonomics that fit animal bodies really, really, really well.
Fabulous. Well, we all look forward, and if you're going to be doing more studies with birds, you know, certainly contact us, contact the other bird clubs, whatever. If you need to recruit more people, you've got. I mean, just on this call alone, you've got several. I see at least people from at least 5 bird clubs are on this call.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Okay.
Names I don't even know. So 5, 6, I think 6 at least. And so you have a ready audience if you need people, if you need
I
stuff.
appreciate that.
Be easy enough to get more people.
I really appreciate that. If sometimes I put out the email if we're looking for people, if you guys ever get an email, feel free to forward it around too. Yeah, for any of the stuff coming in. Thank you guys. I had this dream of unlaving research, and you make it possible.
Yeah, and there are a ton of comments in here. We didn't so we didn't even talk about most of them, but they're all in the chat there. A lot of comments from various people, from Gayla and Erica and Lauren and so forth. So anybody have any further questions before we wrap up? Right.
Jennifer, I do the newsletter for the South Bay Bird Society, and I have put a couple articles in it. And you also spoke to our club.
Yeah.
During COVID. So I did a whole thing about your study with photos, and I had research, and I got pictures from different sites. So to keep everybody informed.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really are just thrilled with what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's wonderful. All right. Well, I'm going to turn off the recording now, but I want to say thank you to Jen for coming to talk to us again. It's always a tremendous pleasure to keep up with the research you're doing, and I'm sure I can speak for everyone about how excited we were. You know, when every morning I get my New York Times, my electronic New York Times, and I saw your study, and I about flipped out. It's so I couldn't believe, and they weren't making fun of bird research. Sometimes you'll see the reports and it'll be called bird brains or something like that, and I just want to throttle someone, but they took it really seriously and they talked about it, and I thought it was just fabulous and so excited about it. Yeah. I do have to, by the way, anecdotally, what I was arguing with somebody online, not something, I don't usually do this, but they were angry at something I posted. I think it was on a YouTube video, and they called me a bird brain, and I answered back and thanked them profusely because birds are so intelligent that I thought it was a tremendous compliment to be called a bird brain, and I thanked them. And there was just like dead silence. They didn't know what to do with that. So I think I won that. But we eat the two things they say about birds that couldn't be further from the truth: bird brains and eat like a bird. Because to me, eat like a bird means stuff your mouth with every possible amount of food you can get in.
This is very true, and make a big mess on the way. That's hilarious. So, Amy, thank you so much. I just also want to say thank you for your insights and for your shares about what your birds do, because it gives me a lot of information to take back, and I really appreciate you sharing that.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming, and I will turn off the recording now.
Okay.